Good morning. This is Dreadful John. It is my special pleasure to be back with you after a grueling respite. This morning's story is entitled Born of Man and Woman by Richard Matheson. With his permission, I will read it for you. This day, when it had light, Mother called me a wretch. You wretch, she said. I saw in her eyes the anger. I wondered what it is, a wretch. This day, it had water falling from upstairs. It fell all around. I saw that. The ground of the back I watched from the little window. The ground that sucked up the water like thirsty lips. It drank too much, and it got thick and runny brown. I didn't like it. Mother is a pretty, I know. In my bed place with cold walls around, I have a paper theme that was behind the furnace. It says on it, Screen Stars. I see in the pictures faces like of Mother and Father. Father says they are pretty. Once he said it. And also Mother, he said. Mother so pretty, and me decent enough. Look at you, he said, and didn't have the nice face. I touched his arm and said, It is all right, Father. He shook and pulled away where I couldn't reach. Today, Mother let me off the chain a little so I could look out the little window. That's how I saw the water falling from upstairs. A second day. This day it had goldness in the upstairs. As I know, when I looked at it, my eyes hurt. After I look at it, the cellar is red. I think this was church. They leave the upstairs. The big machine swallows them and rolls out past and is gone. In the back part is the little Mother. She is much smaller than me. I am big. It is a secret. But I have pulled the chain out of the wall. I can see out the little window all I like. In this day, when it got dark, I had eaten my food and some bugs. I hear laughs upstairs. I like to know why there are laughs for. I took the chain from the wall and wrapped it around me. I walked squish to the stairs. They creak when I walk on them. My legs slip on them because I don't walk on stairs. My feet stick to the wood. I went up and opened a door. It was a white place. White as white jewels that come from upstairs sometimes. I went in and stood quiet. I hear the laughing some more. I walked to the sound and looked through to the people. More people than I thought was. I thought I should laugh with them. Mother came out and pushed the door in. It hit me and hurt. I fell back on the smooth floor and the chain made noise. I cried. She made a hissing noise into her and put her hand on her mouth. Her eyes got big. She looked at me. I heard Father call. What fell, he called. She said, a iron board. Come help pick it up, she said. He came and said, now is that so heavy you need... He saw me and grew big. The anger came in his eyes. He hit me. I spilled some of the drip on the floor from one arm. It was not nice. It made ugly green on the floor. Father told me to go to the cellar. I had to go. The light, it hurt some now in my eyes. It is not so like that in the cellar. Father tied my legs and arms up. He put me on my bed. Upstairs, I heard laughing while I was quiet there, looking on a black spider that was swinging down to me. I thought what Father said. Oh, God, he said, and only 8. A third day. This day, Father hid in the chain again before it had light. I have to try pull it out again. He said I was bad to come upstairs. He said never do that again or he would beat me hard. That hurt. I hurt. I slept the day and rested my head against the cold wall. I thought of the white place upstairs. A fourth day. I got the chain from the wall out. Mother was upstairs. I heard little laugh very high. I looked out the window. I saw all little people like the little mother and little fathers, too. They are pretty. They were making nice noise and jumping around the ground. Their legs was moving hard. They are like mother and father. Mother says, all right, people look like they do. One of the little fathers saw me. He pointed at the window. I let go and slid down the wall in the dark. I curled up as they would not see. I heard their talks by the window and foots running. Upstairs, there was a door hitting. I heard the little mother call upstairs. I heard heavy steps and I rushed to my bed place. I hit the chain in the wall and lay down on my front. I heard Mother come down. Have you been at the window? She said. I heard the anger. Stay away from the window. You have pulled the chain out again. She took the stick and hit me with it. I didn't cry. I can't do that. But the drip ran all over my bed. She saw it and twisted away and made a noise. Oh, my God, she said. Why have you done this to me? I heard the stick go bounce on the stone floor. She ran upstairs. I slept the day. A fifth day. This day it had water again. When Mother was upstairs, I heard the little one come slow down the steps. I hid myself in the coal bin, for Mother would have anger if the little mother saw me. She had a little live thing with her. It walked on the arms and had pointy ears. She said things to it. It was all right, except the live thing smelled me. It ran up the coal and looked down at me. The hair stood up. In the throat, it made an angry noise. I hissed, but it jumped on me. I didn't want to hurt it. I got fear because it bit me harder than the rat does. I hurt, and the little mother screamed. I grabbed the live thing tight. It made sounds I never heard. I pushed it all together. It was lumpy and red on the black coal. I hid there when Mother called. I was afraid of the stick. She left. I crept over the coal with the thing. I hid it under my pillow and rested on it. I put the chain in the wall again. A day. This is another time. Father chained me tight. I hurt because he beat me. This time I hit the stick out of his hands and made noise. He went away and his face was white. He ran out of my bed place and locked the door. I am not so glad. All day it is cold in here. The chain comes slow out of the wall. And I have a bad anger with Mother and Father. I will show them. I will do what I did that once. I will screech and laugh loud. I will run on the wall. Last, I will hang head down by all my legs and laugh and drip green all over until they are sorry they didn't be nice to me. If they try to beat me again, I'll hurt them. I will.
Dreadful John at Midnight, this morning featuring, by permission of the author, Richard Matheson's Born of Man and Woman, was produced by J. Willis Morrow. This is King's Crown Radio.
Dreadful John. Many of you have informed me that I should tone down some of my stories. You said that Edgar Allan Poe's pestilential Mask of the Red Death maddened you. You said that Ambrose Bierce's viscerous Oil of Dogs sickened you, and that George Clayton Johnson's The Hornet has made your automobile your enemy. You have told me that these ghastly horrors have brought you fiends and incubi oppressing you during your sleep. Actually, it is my considered opinion that these fiends and incubi are merely Michael Markman and his jazz program, which immediately follow me. Listen to Markman, if you dare. However, I have decided, in deference to your kind remarks, to entertain you this morning through the kind permission of the Viking Press, Incorporated, with Alexander Woollcott's Moonlight Sonata, published in the portable Woolcott. Report were to be published in its own England, I would have to cross my fingers and a little forward, explaining that all the characters were fictitious, which stern requirement of the British libel law would embarrass me slightly, because none of the characters is fictitious, and the story, told to Catherine Cornell by Clemence Dane, and by Catherine Cornell to me, chronicles what, to the best of my knowledge and belief, actually befell a young English physician, whom I shall call Alvin Barrack, because that does not happen to be his name. It is an account of a hitherto unreported adventure he had 2 years ago, when he went down into Kent to visit an old friend, let us call him Ellery Cabot, who spent most of his days on the links, and most of his nights wondering how he would ever pay the death duties on the collapsing family manor house, to which he had indignantly fallen heir. This house was a shabby little cousin to Compton Winnett's, with roof tiles of Tudor red making it cozy in the noonday sun, and a hoarse bell which, from the clock tower, had been contemptuously scattering the hours like coins ever since Henry VIII was a rosy stripling. Within, Cazalet could afford only a doddering couple to fend for him, and the once sumptuous gardens did much as they pleased under the care of a single gardener. I think I must risk giving the gardener's real name, for none I could invent would have so appropriate a flavor. It was John Scripture, and he was assisted from time to time by an aged and lunatic father who, in his lucid intervals, would be led out from his captivity under the eaves of the lodge to putter amid the lewd topiarian extravagance of the hedges. The doctor was to come down when he could, with a promise of some good golf, long nights of exquisite silence, and a ghost or two thrown in if his fancy ran that way. It was characteristic of his rather ponderous humor that, in writing to fix a day, he addressed Cazalet at the Creeps, Senex, Kent. When he arrived, it was to find his host away from home and not due back until all hours. Barrack was to dine alone with a reproachful setter for a companion and did not wait up. His bedroom on the ground floor was beautifully paneled from footboard to ceiling, but some misguided housekeeper under the fourth George had fallen upon the lovely woodwork with a can of black varnish. The dowry, brought by a Cazalet bride of the mauve decade, had been invested in a few vintage bathrooms, and one of these had replaced a prayer closet that once opened into this room. There was only a candle to read by, but the light of a full moon came waveringly through the wind-stirred vines that half-curtained the mullioned windows. In this museum, Barrack dropped off to sleep. He did not know how long he had slept when he found himself awake again and conscious that something was astir in the room. It took him a moment to place the movement, but at last, in a patch of moonlight, he made out a hunched figure that seemed to be sitting with bent, engrossed head in the chair by the door. It was the hand, or rather the whole arm, that was moving, tracing a recurrent, if irregular course in the air. At first, the gesture was teasingly half familiar, and then Barrett recognized it as the one a woman makes when embroidering. There would be a hesitation, as if the needle were being thrust through some taut, resistant material, and then, each time, the long, swift, sure pull of the thread. To the startled guest, this seemed to be the least menacing activity he had ever heard ascribed to a ghost. But just the same, he had only one idea, and that was to get out of that room with all possible dispatch. His mind made a hasty reconnaissance. The door into the hall was out of the question, for madness lay that way. At least he would have to pass right by that weaving arm. Nor did he relish a blind plunge into the thorny shrubbery beneath his window and a barefoot scamper across the frosty turf. Of course, there was the bathroom, but that was small comfort if he could not get out of it by another door. In a spasm of concentration, he remembered that he had seen another door. Just at the moment of this realization, he heard the comfortingly actual sound of a car coming up the drive and guessed that it was his host returning. In one magnificent movement, he leaped to the floor, bounded into the bathroom, and bolted its door behind him. The floor of the room beyond was quilted with moonlight. Wading through that, he arrived, breathless but unmolested, in the corridor. Further along, he could see the lamp left burning in the entrance hall and hear the clatter of his host closing the front door. As Barrett came hurrying out of the darkness to greet him, Cazalet boomed his delight at such affability and, famished by his long, cold ride, proposed an immediate raid on the larder. The doctor, already sheepish at his recent panic, said nothing about it and was all for food at once. With lighted candles held high, the foraging party descended to the offices, and mine host was descanting on the merits of cold roast beef, cheddar cheese, and milk as a light midnight snack, when he stumbled over a bundle on the floor. With a cheerful curse at the old goody of the kitchen, who was always leaving something about, he bent to see what it was this time, and let out a whistle of surprise. Then, by two candles held low, he and the doctor saw something they will not forget as long as they live. It was the body of the cook. Just the body. The head was gone. On the floor alongside lay a bloody cleaver. Old Scripture, by God, Cazalet cried out, and in a flash Barrett guessed. Still clutching a candle in one hand, he dragged his companion back through the interminable house to the room from which he had fled, motioning him to be silent, tiptoeing the final steps. That precaution was wasted, for a regiment could not have disturbed the rapt contentment of the ceremony still in progress within. The old lunatic had not left his seat by the door. Between his knees, he still held the head of the woman he had killed. Scrupulously, happily, crooning at his work, he was plucking out the gray hairs, one by one.
Dreadful John may be heard Tuesdays at midnight.
Good morning. This is Dreadful John at Midnight. This morning's story is by H.G. Wells. It is entitled The Comb. It is taken from the Partner Story and Others, copyright 1897 by Methuen.
The night was hot and overcast, the sky red-rimmed with the lingering sunset of midsummer. They sat at the open window, trying to fancy the air was fresher there. The trees and shrubs of the garden stood stiff and dark. Beyond, in the roadway, a gas lamp burned, bright orange against the hazy blue of the evening. Farther were three lights of the railway signal against the lowering sky. The man and woman spoke to one another in low tones. "He doesn't suspect?" said the man a little nervously. "Not he," she said peevishly, as though that too irritated her. "He thinks of nothing but the works and the prices of fuel. He has no imagination, no poetry." "None of these men of iron have," he said sententiously. "They have no hearts." "He hasn't," she said. She turned her discontented face towards the window. The distant sound of a roaring and rushing drew nearer and grew in volume. The house quivered. One heard the metallic rattle of the timber. As the train passed, there was a glare of light above the cutting and a driving tumult of smoke. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 black oblongs. 8 trucks passed across the dim gray of the embankment and were suddenly extinguished one by one in the throat of the tunnel, which, with the last, seemed to swallow down train, smoke, and sound in one abrupt gulp. "This country was all fresh and beautiful once," he said, "and now it is Gehenna. Down that way, nothing but pot banks and chimneys belching fire and dust into the face of heaven. But what does it matter? An end comes, an end to all this cruelty. Tomorrow." He spoke the last word in a whisper. "Tomorrow," she said, speaking in a whisper too, and still staring out of the window. "Dear," he said, putting his hand on hers. She turned with a start, and their eyes searched one another's. Hers softened to his gaze. "My dear one," she said, and then, "It seems so strange that you should have come into my life like this, to open—" She paused. "To open," he said. "All this wonderful world," she hesitated and spoke still more softly, "this world of love to me." Then, suddenly, the door clicked and closed. They turned their heads, and he started violently back. In the shadow of the room stood a great shadowy figure, silent. They saw the face dimly in the half-light, with unexpressive dark patches under the penthouse brows. Every muscle in Ralph's body suddenly became tense. When could the door have opened? What had he heard? Had he heard all? What had he seen? A tumult of questions. The newcomer's voice came at last, after a pause that seemed interminable. "Well?" he said. "I was afraid I'd missed you, Horrocks," said the man at the window, gripping the window ledge with his hand. His voice was unsteady. The clumsy figure of Horrocks came forward out of the shadow. He made no answer to Ralph's remark. For a moment he stood above them. The woman's heart was cold within her. "I told Mr. Ralph it was just possible you might come back," she said in a voice that never quivered. Horrocks, still silent, sat down abruptly in the chair by her little work table. His big hands were clenched. One saw now the fire of his eyes under the shadow of his brows. He was trying to get his breath. His eyes went from the woman he had trusted to the friend he had trusted, and then back to the woman. By this time, and for the moment, all three half understood one another. Yet none dared say a word to ease the pent-up things that choked them. It was the husband's voice that broke the silence at last. "You wanted to see me?" he said to Ralph. Ralph started as he spoke. "I came to see you," he said, resolved to lie to the last. "Yes?" said Horrocks. "You promised," said Ralph, "to show me some fine effects of moonlight and smoke." "I promised to show you some fine effects of moonlight and smoke," repeated Horrocks in a colorless voice. "And I thought I might catch you tonight before you went down to the works," proceeded Ralph, "and come with you." There was another pause. Did the man mean to take the thing coolly? Did he know, after all? How long had he been in the room? Yet even at the moment when they heard the door, their attitudes... Horrocks glanced at the profile of the woman, shadowy pallid in the half-light.
Then he glanced at Ralph and seemed to recover himself suddenly. "Of course," he said, "I promised to show you the works under the proper dramatic conditions. It's odd how I could have forgotten." "If I'm troubling you," began Ralph. Horrocks started again. A new light had suddenly come into the sultry gloom of his eyes. "Not in the least," he said. "Have you been telling Mr. Ralph of all these contrasts of flame and shadow you think so splendid?" said the woman, turning now to her husband for the first time, her confidence creeping back again, her voice just one half note too high. "That dreadful theory of yours about machinery is beautiful, and everything else in the world ugly. I thought he would spare you, Mr. Ralph. It's his great theory, his one discovery in art." "I'm slow to make discoveries," said Horrocks grimly, dampening her suddenly. "But what I discover—" He stopped. "Well," she said, "nothing." And suddenly he rose to his feet. "I promised to show you the works," he said to Ralph, and put his big, clumsy hand on his friend's shoulder. "Are you ready to go?" "Quite," said Ralph, and stood up also. "Very well," said Horrocks, and, dropping his hand, turned towards the door. "My hat?" Ralph looked around in the half-light. "That's my work basket," said Mrs. Horrocks with a gust of hysterical laughter. Their hands came together on the back of the chair. "Here it is," he said. She had an impulse to warn him in an undertone, but she could not frame a word. "Don't go," and "beware of him," struggled in her mind, and the swift moment passed. "Got it?" said Horrocks, standing with the door half open. Ralph stepped towards him. "Better say goodbye to Mrs. Horrocks," said the ironmaster, even more grimly quiet in his tone than before. Ralph started and turned. "Good evening, Mrs. Horrocks," he said, and their hands touched. Horrocks held the door open with a ceremonial politeness unusual in him towards men. Ralph went out, and then, after a wordless look at her husband followed. The oppressive stillness of the evening weighed heavily upon Ralph. They went side by side down the road in silence, and in silence turned into the cinder-made byway that presently opened out of the prospect of the valley. A blue haze, half dust, half mist, touched the long valley with mystery. Beyond were Hanley and Etruria, gray and black masses, outlined thinly by the rare golden dots of the street lamps, and here and there a gaslit window, or the yellow glare of some late-working factory or crowded public house. Out of the masses, clear and slender against the evening sky, rose a multitude of tall chimneys, many of them reeking, a few smokeless during a season of play. Nearer at hand was the broad stretch of railway, and to the left, between the railway and the dark mass of the low hill beyond, dominating the whole view, colossal, inky black, and crowned with smoke and fitful flames, stood the great cylinders of the Jeddah Company blast furnaces, the central edifices of the big ironworks of which Horrocks was the manager. They stood heavy and threatening, full of an incessant turmoil of flames and seething molten iron, and about the feet of them rattled the rolling mills, and the steam hammer beat heavily and splashed the white iron sparks hither and thither. Even as they looked, a truck full of fuel was shot into one of the giants, and the red flames gleamed out, and a confusion of smoke and black dust came boiling upwards towards the sky. "Certainly you get some fine effects of color with your furnaces," said Ralph, breaking a silence that had become apprehensive. Horrocks grunted. He stood with his hands in his pockets, frowning down at the dim, steaming railway and the busy ironworks beyond, frowning as if he were thinking out some knotty problem. Ralph glanced at him and away again. "At present, your moonlight effect is hardly right," he continued, looking upward. "The moon is still smothered by the vestiges of daylight." Horrocks stared at him with the expression of a man who has suddenly awakened. "Vestiges of daylight? Of course. Of course." He, too, looked up at the moon, pale still in the midsummer sky. "Come along," he said suddenly, and, gripping Ralph's arm in his hand, made a move towards the path that dropped from them to the railway. Ralph hung back. Their eyes met, and he saw 1,000 things in a moment that their lips came near to say. Horrocks' hand tightened and then relaxed. He let go, and before Ralph was aware of it, they were arm in arm and walking, one unwillingly enough, down the path. They stood now near the bottom of the hill, close to the fence that bordered the railway. The ironworks had grown larger and spread out with their approach. They looked up to the blast furnaces now instead of down. The further view of Etruria and Hanley had dropped out of sight with their descent. Before them, by the stile, rose a notice board bearing, still dimly visible, the words, "Beware of the trains," half hidden by splashes of coaly mud. "Fine effects," said Horrocks, waving his arm. "Here comes a train. The puffs of smoke, the range glare, the round eye of light in front of it, the melodious rattle. Fine effects. But these furnaces of mine used to be finer before we shoved cones in their throats and saved the gas." "How?" said Ralph. "Cones?" "Cones, my man, cones. I'll show you one nearer. The flames used to flare out of the open throats, great, pillars of cloud by day, red and black smoke, and pillars of fire by night. Now we run it off in pipes and burn it to heat the blast, and the top is shut by a cone. You'll be interested in that cone." "But every now and then," said Ralph, "you get a burst of fire and smoke up there." "The cone's not fixed. It's hung by a chain from a lever and balanced by an equipoise. You'll see it nearer. Else, of course, there'd be no way of getting fuel into the thing. Every now and then the cone dips, and out comes the flare." "I see," said Ralph. He looked over his shoulder. "The moon gets brighter," he said. Suppose this slouching, scowling monster did know anything. For a minute or two, then, Ralph was really afraid for his life, but the mood passed as he reasoned with himself. After all, Horrocks might have heard nothing. His odd manner might be due to the mere vague jealousy he had shown once before. He was talking now of the ash heaps in the canal. "Eh?" said Horrocks. "What?" said Ralph. "Rather, the haze in the moonlight. Fine." "Our canal," said Horrocks, stopping suddenly, "our canal by moonlight and firelight is an immense effect. You've never seen it? Fancy that. You've spent too many of your evenings philandering up in Newcastle there. I tell you, for real florid effects. But you shall see. Boiling water." As they came out of the labyrinth of clinker heaps and mounds of coal and ore, the noises of the rolling mill sprang upon them suddenly, loud, near, and distinct. 3 shadowy workmen went by and touched their caps to Horrocks. Their faces were vague in the darkness. Ralph felt a futile impulse to address them, and before he could frame his words, they passed into the shadows. Horrocks pointed to the canal close before them now, a weird-looking place it seemed, in the blood-red reflections of the furnaces. The hot water that cooled the tuyeres came into view. Some 50 yards up, a tumultuous, almost boiling affluent, and the steam rose up from the water in silent white wisps and streaks, wrapping damply about them, an incessant succession of ghosts coming up from the black and red eddies, a white uprising that made the head swim. The shining black tower of the larger blast furnace rose overhead out of the mist, and its tumultuous riot filled their ears. Ralph kept away from the edge of the water and watched Horrocks. "Here, it's red," said Horrocks. "Blood-red vapor as red and hot as sin. But yonder there, where the moonlight falls on it and it drives across the clinker heaps, it's as white as death." Ralph turned his head for a moment and then came back hastily to his watch on Horrocks. "Come along to the rolling mills," said Horrocks. The threatening hold was not so evident that time, and Ralph felt a little reassured. But all the same, what on earth did Horrocks mean about white as death and red as sin? Coincidence, perhaps? "Come on," said Horrocks in Ralph's ear, and they went and peeped through the little glass hole behind the tuyeres and saw the funneled fire rising in the pit of the blast furnace. It left one eye blinded for a while. Then, with green and blue patches dancing across the dark, they went to the lift by which the trucks of ore and fuel and lime were raised to the top of the big cylinder. And out upon the narrow rail that overhung the furnace, Ralph's doubts came upon him again. Was it wise to be here? If Horrocks did know everything, do what he could not resist a violent trembling. Right underfoot was a sheer depth of 70 feet. It was a dangerous place. They pushed by a truck of fuel to get to the railing that crowned the place. The reek of the furnace, a sulphurous vapor streaked with pungent bitterness, seemed to make the distant hillside of Hanley quiver. The moon was riding out now from among a drift of clouds, halfway up the sky above the undulating wooded outlines of Newcastle. The steaming canal ran away from below them under an indistinct bridge and vanished into the dim haze of the flat fields toward Durslem. "That's the cone I've been telling you of," shouted Horrocks. "And below that, 60 feet of fire and molten metal, with the air of the blast frothing through it like gas in soda water." Ralph gripped the handrail tightly and stared down at the cone. The heat was intense. The boiling of the iron and the tumult of the blast made a thunderous accompaniment to Horrocks' voice. But the thing had to be gone through now. Perhaps, after all... "In the middle," bawled Horrocks, "temperature near 1,000 degrees. If you were dropped into it, flash into flame like a pinch of gunpowder in a candle. Put your hand out and feel the heat of its breath. Why, even up here, I've seen rainwater boiling off the trucks. And the cone there. It's a damn sight too hot for roasting cakes. The top side of it's 300 degrees. 300 degrees? Said Ralph. 300 centigrade, mind, said Horrocks. It'll boil the blood out of you in no time. Eh? Said Ralph, and turned. Boil the blood out of you in... No, you don't. Let me go, screamed Ralph. Let go my arm. With one hand, he clutched at the handrail. Then with both. For a moment, the two men stood, swaying. Then, suddenly, with a violent jerk, Horrocks had twisted him from his hold. He clutched at Horrocks and missed. His foot went back into empty air. In mid-air, he twisted himself, and then cheek and shoulder and knee struck the hot cone together. He clutched the chain by which the cone hung, and the thing sank an infinitesimal amount as he struck it. A circle of glowing red appeared about him, and a tongue of flame, released from the chaos within, flickered up towards him. An intense pain assailed him at the knees, and he could smell the singeing of his hands. He raised himself to his feet and tried to climb up the chain, and then something struck his head. Black and shining with the moonlight, the throat of the furnace rose about him. Horrocks, he saw, stood above him by one of the trucks of fuel on the rail. The gesticulating figure was bright and white in the moonlight and shouting, "Fizzle, you fool! Fizzle, you hunter of women! You hot-blooded hound! Boil! Boil! Boil!" Suddenly, he caught up a handful of coal out of the truck and flung it deliberately, lump after lump, at Ralph. "Horrocks!" cried Ralph. "Horrocks!" He clung, crying, to the chain, pulling himself up from the burning of the cone. Each missile Horrocks flung hit him. His clothes charred and glowed, and as he struggled, the cone dropped, and a rush of hot, suffocating gas whooped out and burned round him in a swift breath of flame. His human likeness departed from him. When the momentary red had passed, Horrocks saw a charred, blackened figure, its head streaked with blood, still clutching and fumbling with the chain and writhing in agony. A cindery animal, an inhuman, monstrous creature that began a sobbing, intermittent shriek. Abruptly, at the sight, the ironmaster's anger passed. A deadly sickness came upon him. The heavy odor of burning flesh came drifting up to his nostrils. His sanity returned to him. "God have mercy upon me," he cried. "Oh, God, what have I done?" He knew the thing below him, save that it still moved and felt, was already a dead man. That the blood of the poor wretch must be boiling in his veins. An intense realization of that agony came to his mind and overcame every other feeling. For a moment he stood irresolute, and then, turning to the truck, he hastily tilted its contents upon the struggling thing that had once been a man. The mass fell with a thud and went radiating over the cone. With the thud, the shriek ended, and a boiling confusion of smoke, dust, and flame came rushing up towards him. As it passed, he saw the cone clear again. Then he staggered back and stood trembling, clinging to the rail with both hands. His lips moved, but no words came to them. Down below was the sound of voices and running steps. The clangor of rolling in the shed ceased abruptly.
Dreadful John at Midnight, this morning featuring H.G. Wells' The Cone, was produced by J. Willis Morrow with the technical assistance of J. Douglas Gotthoffer, J. Peter Boehm, and H. Burl Kramer. This is King's Crown Radio.
Good morning. This is Dreadful John at Midnight. Let me tell you a few things about this morning's author. A born adventurer, Ambrose Bierce joined the Indiana Infantry in 1861 and fought courageously throughout the Civil War. Then he went to San Francisco, where he followed his chosen profession of journalist and became editor of the News Letter. His aggressiveness and sharp-tongued wit stood him in good stead, and his stories and sketches won great popularity. His success dimmed somewhat as he grew older, but his adventurous spirit remained untamed. At the age of 75, he went off to Mexico to join Villa's band of revolutionists. He was never heard of again. This morning, it is my pleasure to read for you The Boarded Window by Ambrose Bierce. In 1830, only a few miles away from what is now the great city of Cincinnati, lay an immense and almost unbroken forest. The whole region was sparsely settled by people of the frontier, restless souls who no sooner had hewn fairly habitable homes out of the wilderness and attained to that degree of prosperity, which today we should call indigence, than, impelled by some mysterious impulse of their nature, they abandoned all and pushed farther westward to encounter new perils and privations in the effort to regain the meager comforts which they had voluntarily denounced. Many of them had already forsaken that region for the remoter settlements, but among those remaining was one who had been of those first arriving. He lived alone in a house of logs, surrounded on all sides by the great forest, of whose gloom and silence he seemed a part, for no one had ever known him to smile nor to speak a needless word. His simple wants were supplied by the sale or barter of skins of wild animals in the river towns, for not a thing did he grow upon the land which, if needful, he might have claimed by right of undisturbed possession. There were evidences of improvement. A few acres of ground immediately about the house had once been cleared of its trees, the decayed stumps of which were half concealed by the new growth that had been suffered to repair the ravage wrought by the axe. Apparently, the man's zeal for agriculture had burned with a failing flame, expiring in penitential ashes. The little log house, with its chimney of sticks, its roof of warping clapboards weighted with traversing poles, and its chinking of clay, had a single door, and, directly opposite, a window. The latter, however, was boarded up. No one could remember a time when it was not, and none knew why it was so closed. Certainly not because of the occupant's dislike of light and air, for on those rare occasions when a hunter had passed that lonely spot, the recluse had commonly been seen sunning himself on his doorstep if heaven had provided sunshine for his need. I fancy there are few persons living today who ever knew the secret of that window, but I am one, as you shall see. The man's name was said to be Murlock. He was apparently 70 years old, actually about 50. Something besides years had had a hand in his aging. His hair and long, full beard were white, his gray, lusterless eyes sunken, his face singularly seamed with wrinkles which appeared to belong to two intersecting systems. In figure, he was tall and spare, with a stoop of the shoulders, a burden bearer. I never saw him. These particulars I learned from my grandfather, from whom also I got the man's story when I was a lad. He had known him when living nearby in that early day. One day, Murlock was found in his cabin, dead. It was not a time and place for coroners and newspapers, and I suppose it was agreed that he had died from natural causes, or I should have been told, and should remember. I know only that with what was probably a sense of the fitness of things, the body was buried near the cabin alongside the grave of his wife, who had preceded him by so many years that local tradition had retained hardly a hint of her existence. That closes the final chapter of this true story, excepting, indeed, the circumstance that many years afterward, in company with an equally interested spirit, I penetrated to the place and ventured near enough to the ruined cabin to throw a stone against it, and ran away to avoid the ghost, which every well-informed boy thereabout knew haunted the spot. But there is an earlier chapter. That's supplied by my grandfather. When Murlock built his cabin and began laying sturdily about with his axe to hew out a farm, the rifle, meanwhile, his means of support, he was young, strong, and full of hope. In that eastern country whence he came, he had married, as was the fashion, a young woman and always worthy of his honest devotion, who shared the dangers and privations of his lot with a willing spirit and light heart. There is no known record of her name. Of her charms of mind and person, tradition is silent, and the doubter is at liberty to entertain his doubt. But God forbid that I should share it. Of their affection and happiness, there is abundant assurance in every added day of the man's widowed life. For what but the magnetism of a blessed memory could have chained that venturesome spirit to a lot like that? One day, Murlock returned from gunning in a distant part of the forest to find his wife prostrate with fever and delirious. There was no physician within miles, no neighbor, nor was she in a condition to be left to summon help. So he set about the task of nursing her back to health, but at the end of the third day, she fell into unconsciousness and so passed away, apparently, with never a gleam of returning reason. From what we know of a nature like his, when they venture to sketch in some of the details of the outline picture drawn by my grandfather. When convinced that she was dead, Murlock had sense enough to remember that the dead must be prepared for burial. In performance of this sacred duty, he blundered now and again, did certain things incorrectly, and others which he did correctly were done over and over. His occasional failures to accomplish some simple and ordinary act filled him with astonishment, like that of a drunken man who wonders at the suspension of familiar natural law. He was surprised, too, that he did not weep, surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it is unkind not to weep for the dead. Tomorrow, he said aloud, I shall have to make the coffin and dig the grave, and then I shall miss her when she is no longer in sight. But now, she is dead, of course. But it is all right. It must be all right somehow. Things cannot be so bad as they seem. He stood over the body in the fading light, adjusting the hair and putting the finishing touches to the simple toilette, doing all mechanically, with soulless care. And still, through his consciousness, ran an undersense of conviction that all was right, that he should have her again as before, and everything explained. He had had no experience in grief. His capacity had not been enlarged by youth. His heart could not contain it all, nor his imagination rightly conceive it. He did not know he was so hard-struck. That knowledge would come later and never go. Grief is an artist of powers as various as the instruments upon which he plays his dirges for the dead, evoking from some the sharpest, shrillest notes, from others the low, grave chords that throb recurrent like the slow beating of a distant drum. Some natures it startles, some it stupefies. To one it comes like the stroke of an arrow, stinging all the sensibilities to a keener life. To another as the blow of a bludgeon, which in crushing benumbs. We may conceive Murlock to have been that way affected, for, and here we're upon surer ground than that of conjecture, no sooner had he finished his pious work than, sinking into a chair by the side of the table upon which the body lay, and noting how white the profile showed in the deepening gloom, he laid his arms upon the table's edge and dropped his face into them, tearless yet and unutterably weary. At that moment came in through the open window a long, wailing sound like the cry of a lost child in the far deeps of the darkening wood. But the man did not move. Again, and nearer than before, sounded that unearthly cry upon his failing sense. Perhaps it was a wild beast. Perhaps it was a dream. for Murlock was asleep. Some hours later, as it afterward appeared, this unfaithful watcher awoke and lifting his head from his arms intently listened, he knew not why. There in the black darkness by the side of the dead, recalling all without a shock, he strained his eyes to see, he knew not what. His senses were all alert. His breath was suspended. His blood had stilled its tides as if to assist the silence. Who, what had awakened him, and where was it? Suddenly the table shook beneath his arm, and at the same moment he heard, or fancied that he heard, a light, soft step. Another. Sounds of bare feet upon the floor. He was terrified beyond the power to cry out or move. Perforce he waited there in the darkness through seeming centuries of such dread as one may know, yet live to tell. He tried vainly to speak the dead woman's name, vainly to stretch forth his hand across the table to learn if she were there. His throat was powerless. His arms and hands were like lead. Then occurred something most frightful. Some heavy body seemed hurled against the table with an impetus that pushed it against his breast so sharply as nearly to overthrow him. And at the same instant he heard and felt the fall of something upon the floor with so violent a thump that the whole house was shaken by the impact. A scuffling ensued, and a confusion of sounds impossible to describe. Murlock had risen to his feet. Fear had by excess forfeited control of his faculties. He flung his hands upon the table. Nothing was there. There is a point at which terror may turn to madness, and madness incites to action. With no definite intent, from no motive but the wayward impulse of a madman, Murlock sprang to the wall. With a little groping, seized his loaded rifle, and without aim discharged it. By the flash which lit up the room with a vivid illumination, he saw an enormous panther dragging the dead woman toward the window, its teeth fixed in her throat. Then there were darkness, blacker than before, and silence. And when he returned to consciousness, the sun was high and the wood vocal with songs of birds. The body lay near the window where the beast had left it when frightened away by the flash and report of the rifle. The clothing was deranged, the long hair in disorder, the limbs lay anyhow. From the throat, dreadfully lacerated, had issued a pool of blood not yet entirely coagulated. The ribbon with which he had bound the wrists was broken. The hands were tightly clenched. Between the teeth was a fragment of the animal's ear. I've had the pleasure of reading for you The Boarded Window by Ambrose Bierce. I now have the pleasure of praying with you all, from ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. Dear Lord, deliver us, at least until this same time next week.
Dreadful John at Midnight is produced and directed by Clive Thomas Cuthbertson. This is King's Crown Radio.